Well, hello and welcome to this very brief presentation about digital transformation with the ePerspective Digital Enterprise Method and Framework. I'm Arsalan Rad. We have already made available a more comprehensive version of this presentation. This is really one that is meant to be a brief presentation about how we can accelerate digital transformation with the Digital Enterprise Method and Framework ePerspectives. So we talked very briefly before about paradigm shift when we went in the electronic world from the analog world to the digital world, when we had instead of having tedious little devices that had so many wires and cables going from them that it was impossible to actually replace one, and hence gain this flexibility, not to mention all the other headaches. We drew the parallel then with the same when we went to the digital world in the electronics, and how we had the componentized view. Now we have a sequential end-to-end, a one common circuit diagram that tells us where everything is and with their relation. And then we have componentized this so that we can replace an amplifier with a new, better amplifier, as we mentioned, as long as it maintains its interfaces, 8 or 12 or 16 legs that it has. So we could just make this stereo enhanced with enhanced amplification by simply replacing a given component amplifier by another one that respects and maintains that interface. And from the next moment, the entire ecosystem will carry on seamlessly as if nothing happened, except there is better amplification. And that is the principle we said we want to use in business as well, where we have old, tedious, structure-driven organizations with a lot of connections. Everything is all over the place in the organization. Too many methods, too many documents, too many silos, and so on. And we talked about going from that to an enterprise that similarly is componentized, and it has a low degree of coupling, and we can also similarly replace a given capability with another without having too many other issues. So we talked about doing the same thing similar on the business and the electronic world, using the same analogy when it comes to making both of them digital. So both need to be end to end, they need to be sequential, they need to be componentized, have a low coupling so that we can have flexibility. They need to have good cohesion. We have a perspective based method that only puts things that are relevant or pertinent to a given perspective within that perspective, not much more. So this is what we talked about, how the ePerspective framework becomes basically like your digital circuit of your business enterprise organization, if you will, and gives us the same advantages. So what does it look like? This is the one pager for it. We went through, so we talked about key perspectives being business, enterprise, and change. And we have support perspective of operations, which we split into operations and enterprise planning. We will not cover that right now so much, focusing on business and enterprise and change perspective. Everything that is to do with business, agnostic to the rest, how we implement it is in the business perspective. Then the enterprise perspective comes in and makes that deployable and implementable. So the business, based on what we have, the budget, the people, resources, technology, capabilities that we have, how do we then implement this business in our organization or in our enterprise, if you will? And then last, we defined change as baseline plus delta. So every time there's a change, there's a baseline and there's a delta that needs to be changed. So what we talked about is we regard business, these two, as two baselines. So we can look at the business perspective baseline, which is encapsulated in this business capability model, and we will look at it and say, okay, is there anything changed there? So we go and apply those changes. Then we look at the enterprise baseline. Okay, that business has been changed. So what is the technology, operational, organization aspects that get impacted, so we can make that change and implement the new change in there as well. And then we define this change here and then baseline it, and then we go to change implementation. In here, we talked about the business perspective first, coming enterprise perspective later, and the change perspective. Business perspective, we talked about the sub-perspectives of business strategy and business design, one of which is about what do we want to be to the outside world, what is it we want to do, what are our strategic capabilities, and how do we provide them and how do we excel. And then when we figure that out, we go to business design. In this part, we talk about, okay, we know the strategy, we know the capabilities, how to measure and all that. Now, what is the business operating model that we put in place that best can satisfy that? We do all this agnostic to implementation. Then we go to the enterprise perspective and we look at the IT and technology as well as organization resourcing that we need, we have or need to put in place to best optimally satisfy what the business wanted to achieve. And then we talked about change perspective, breaking it into two sub perspectives of change planning and change realization. So this change is broken into its own sub-perspective, one of them when we do the change planning and one of them when we do the change realization. What goes inside each one of them, we talked about that what is internal here is none of anybody else's business. So all this fancy science of strategy of Lean and Six Sigma and TQM and MIT's ESAT, business canvas modeling, all that is fine, but it's only relevant to the people who work within that sub-perspective. The only thing that is relevant is how they encapsulate and capture and map all that data into a strategic capability model, which then will be also, so we have our strategic capabilities, but also mapped through something like an X matrix to, as minimum, to KPIs, but also to we could have them to strategic values and strategic objectives as KPIs, as the X matrix of MIT's ESAT methodology recommends, so that from now on our strategic capabilities are measurable, because they will be the foundation of everything we do, and we want to be able to measure even the technology impact in terms of its business value. What we said was the most important, the only thing that is relevant to the not even outside world, but to the outside perspective within the same perspective, the second sub-perspective within the same perspective, that is business design, is the strategic capability model that is going to it as an input, right? So we talked about here how we do business modeling, business service design, value stream modeling, customer journey modeling, and all that stuff. And we start from a strategic capability model and evolve it into a business capability model, which encapsulates the business operating model for us, agnostic to implementation and technology. So how we do things in terms of process and how we are structured, our organization, which should ideally be based on this business capability model similarly. Then, as the only thing that is relevant from the entire blue perspective to the to the rest of the ecosystem is this business capability model. And there's only one line, so this is just illustrative, but one line. So this business capability model becomes our starting point for the enterprise capability model. So we will look at now for every business capability, what is its technology profile, organization, resourcing, planning profile, and based on that, then we have we can do exercises such as heat mapping for every capability to see how important it might be for us or not. And based on that, we create our change capability model, right? CCM, which is a subset that addresses the changes, with parts that we're going to do changes. And we talked about the planning is extremely important to be aligned with the enterprise perspective or enterprise architecture function, if you will, that we need to do capability-driven solutioning as well as capability-driven planning. So no more traditional program management with work packets as chunks of work, but they need to be capabilities, services within capability cohesively, out of which we choose those that are prioritized, and we go ahead and implement them. And we talked about breaking the change realization into 3 different streams. One of them, when we add something and developing something new, when like a DevOps project to get some IoT capability, for example. We have what is maintained and run, so what we need to keep and run it the right way. And last but not least, and most challenging, is when we change things, when we need to rationalize, optimize, that is keep what we have, and also add and improve. That means what we do usually use a bimodal, multi-speed, multimodal approach that is optimized in order for us to get where we want to go. We talked about the single most important artifact part of XCM being this is the enterprise capability model. We talked about the 4 key aspects where we look at every capability, such as billing. We looked at its business strategic value, like what is your value into what services do you have, and what is your business importance to value in terms of KPIs. Then you have an organizational profiling of it. So for billing, what organization, what part, what geographies do we have, what people, who is IT, who is non-IT, who is business, and so on. We can look at billing, what packages do I have, what technology do I have, what databases or data or hardware operating system we have, but not only that, but also who is the vendor for that package, what is my internal rating of that vendor, how long do I have a relationship commitment for a given application, and so on for that vendor. And last but not least, what plans and projects are we doing in what geographies, locally or otherwise, that are touching about this capability billing, doing something about it. Only when we have this 360-degree view as valid and reliable, as single source of truth, as I mentioned, as CIOs I've worked with it, refer to it as my command and control center and the place where I can do what if scenario and fact-based decisions. This is it. Now we also show here a tool called Alphabet, but anybody can tool what tools they want. Alphabet belongs to Software AG, and they have in fact adopted this method and framework and very much promoted and actually successfully used it in successful projects. So you can see, for example, they have a version of the X matrix in the tooling. I've worked very closely with the COE people, fantastic people, to make the method and tool much more in tandem, because we all understand that a tool without the right method and approach will be not, as they say, in a fool's hand, what is a tool, right? So this gives us a possibility to do full-fledged what-if scenario simulations, if you will, get reports, custom reports that we want. So for example, COO can say, okay, I need a report that tells me what projects are there that have higher KPI value than a given value, that are behind schedule. I want a view of their budget, and I want a view of their organization part, what people are involved, and what part of the organization involved. And I want to see what is the technology and IT that is in scope for them, how much are we paying, and who are the vendors, and what is our relationship, whatever you wish. Based on this, as I mentioned, CIOs and C-level people or decision makers can make fact-based decisions, not based on speculation or which person does a better job promoting themselves or which vendor does a better job in selling their things. So we talked about this golden thread, that we said that anybody else who works, this is a good news, anybody else who works in any part of the organization, they only need to focus on their own element, and they don't bother the rest of the world. Only the sub-perspective they're in will be concerned with what they do. So, and the rest of it is, the job for them is to feed that into the XCM. Feed the output, whatever they do, distill that, and feed it the right way, map it into the XCM. So we only have one central artifact that is going across different units and so on, called XCM, and XCM takes these different 4 stages of it, and through this we can have access to any insight or data we want to make the right decisions, and it's up to date and it's on demand. So the 4 stages, very briefly again: SCM, when we look at the strategic capability model, high level, what we are to the world, what we want to do, what are the key services and capabilities to the outside world, and make them measurable to using something like an X matrix. Then we start in the business design with from a strategic capability, evolve it by doing value stream and process modeling analysis and such. Evolve it into a business capability model, which is the business operating model agnostic to implementation for our future organization, basically. Then we come to ECM. We start from the business capability model, and now we map that, so we make that implementable and deployable within our organization with what we have. So with the technology, budget, resourcing, etc., we devise a way that it's optimal, that the business can be run the best way, so that in order to get the results it needs. And last was the subset of ECM, where we want to make changes. We define change as baseline plus delta. So the delta becomes, in terms of this subset, the parts that we see that need to be changed, and we have a plan to implement and change it. This gives a very quick view of the XCM. As you see, one artifact that captures SCM, BCM, ECM, and CCM. So in here we have the strategic capability model. In here you see X matrix relations, so the business value for a strategic capability. So as I mentioned, we have the strategic capabilities mapped and measurable from a business point of view. Then they evolve and become these business capabilities that entail processes and services within them. So as you can see now, the business processes and services implicitly have a business value assigned to him because they're mapped into the strategy. Now, as I mentioned, the business capability model becomes the foundation on which we build the enterprise capability model. So these business capabilities will be mapped to the four aspects of the two main ones of IT technology and organization resourcing. And IT technology, we look at apps, data, and technology and infrastructure, and organization. So for a given capability, as I mentioned, we can look at it and say, you as a business capability, first of all, what is your strategic value contribution, which we see here, derived from the X matrix or from the business strategy piece. But also we can look at it and say, okay, this business capability, tell me what apps do we have, what applications, and then later from the application we can derive who is the vendor and other type of data we need from it. Data, infrastructure and technology, what we have for the given capability, and also what people and resourcing do we have from it. And based on doing a heat map analysis, what if scenario, you can do 80-20, you can look at applications, you can look at all these aspects and do a thorough fact-based analysis in one common artifact of XCM, and then devise again delta plus baseline changes delta plus baseline. So the delta is the gaps we have. So wherever we have gap, we will define it, and we will show later in a different module how we actually, once this is done, we have actually automated it in with some clients, that you can actually press the button and you get a capability-driven program plan based on capabilities, hence mutual integrity. So as you can see here, the services, as if we expand later to sub-services, they all belong to capability. So that's the end of the road for having the situation, which I'm sure some organizations have experienced, that you give chunks of work to people and say, okay, you go and do, for example, my CPQ, and you go and do something else for me, like a payment management. Both of them require invoicing and billing, but they work in separation without a connection. They might even be in different countries or geographies. And what happens, each one of them has billing requirements, so each one of them go and defines their own billing requirements and then implement it, and many a time they actually go and buy a package for that to do it. And you can imagine that none of them should have done that. The only person who should be authorized to work on anything with billing is the one who's working on the billing capability. The rest should consume those services. So if they want something changed, they should ask him. Therefore, we don't end up with 3 different packages that later we have to have a fight, and nobody wants to give up their baby, whatever they bought, and then we will skip that, and we will have one application instead of many. So you can imagine the efficiency and the cost saving. We will cover the XCM with true live examples later on in detail. So we talked about the key characteristics of the framework, that it's one unified baseline, one unified circuit diagram for everything we do. We separate concerns. We have perspective-based encapsulation. What you do in your perspective, don't bother others with it, except what you need to provide that goes as an input to them, which is the XCM. So that's the only thing which we taught. And the separation of concerns also is we can refer to the internal versus external principle we have. Again, the same thing. So whatever is internal to you, if you're dealing with architecture, for example, the orange perspective, then your application architecture, your TOGAF, and all that stuff is very good internally for you to debate. But please don't bring it into a meeting when there's business perspective people there, because they are not interested in the subparts. The only thing that orange perspective brings to the blue perspective is the XCM, what they have in common, on which they can discuss what we are doing with the capabilities. We have a high degree of cohesion and low degree of coupling, similar to digital circuit, electronic circuits. And we have only one unified central artifact, as you've seen, single source of truth. All the insight and data will be captured there. So, and we define roles, what access do they have, can they read it, can they edit it, and so on. But this is done under a very strict regime. So we avoid all those typical problems that I don't need to count, that I'm sure you know, that are there from a point of view of mutual integrity. And I leave you with this, that this method and framework has been successfully adopted by world-leading organizations and with great reviews. And in fact, I take pride in it. It's not PowerPoint based, it's not abstract, it's not technical jargon. It has a very clear way into doing things, and intuitive way that business people or program people, portfolio people can also understand. It's not a tedious technology-based kind of proposition that is very difficult to understand, and it has really been used in execution of very successful digital transformation strategic level at top clients. I'd be more than happy, together with my colleague Simon Howdens, to discuss how you can leverage the ePerspectives framework the best way for your organization. On that note, I would like to thank you for the time. In the other presentations, we will delve into much more granular details of the framework. Wish you all a very good day. Thank you.